on digital radio, digital TV, downloads and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. 5 Live Breakfast.
Good morning, 6 minutes past 7, and today is the day. Today, finally, the Chilcot Report into the Iraq War will be published. The inquiry investigated the decision to go to war in 2003, whether troops were properly prepared, how the conflict was conducted, and what planning there was for the aftermath. Well, here's a reminder of how we got to where we are today.
Downing Street has just published its long-awaited evidence against Saddam Hussein, aiming to show that the Iraqi leader is developing weapons of mass destruction.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons, that Saddam has continued to produce them, that he has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes.
People around the world have been demonstrating their opposition to military action against Iraq.
We will lose this war. It will be a failure. All it will achieve is to be the best recruiting agent that the terrorists could hope for.
On Tuesday night, I gave the order for British forces to take part in military action in Iraq. Tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea. Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
The United States and our allies have prevailed. The tyrant has fallen and Iraq is free.
I'm today announcing the establishment of an independent Privy Councillor Committee of Inquiry. It will consider the period from summer 2001, before military operations began in March 2003, and our subsequent involvement in Iraq right until the end of July this year.
Would somebody like Tony Blair, from the day he went into politics, think that somebody like Saddam Hussein should be got rid of? Yes, he would. Was that the policy that he was pursuing the whole way through? No.
What I was saying to President Bush, and I wasn't saying this privately, incidentally, I was saying it publicly, was we are going to be with you in confronting and dealing with this threat. If there was any possibility that he could develop weapons of mass destruction, we should stop him. That was my view. That was my view then, that's my view now.
I see the military keep saying they didn't have this and that. Well, then they should have said to Blair, we're not ready, because there was no emergency. We could have taken longer. We've made Iraq more dangerous as well as causing enormous suffering.
The Iraq inquiry was set up to identify the lessons that should be learned from the UK's involvement in Iraq. No one's on trial, but I make a commitment here that once we get to our final report, we will not shy away from making criticisms either of institutions or processes or individuals where they are truly warranted.
Tony Blair wrote to me once and told me to be proud of him. He died defending his country, and I had to correct the Prime Minister, and I replied in a letter, Mr Blair, I don't need you to tell me to be proud of my son, but I must correct you. He did not die defending his country, he died serving his country, because his country was never under threat from Iraq.
179 British military personnel were killed in Iraq between 2003 and 2009. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis lost their lives. Let's speak to Labour MP Mike Gapes, who supported the Iraq War, voted against setting up a judicial inquiry to investigate it. Good morning.
Can I correct you, please? I didn't vote against. I voted for Gordon Brown's inquiry in 2009. The argument was, should we set up an inquiry while our troops were still there?
I do apologise. Thank you very much, Mike, for
Thank you.
What do you think about today's report?
Well, obviously, we won't know what it says until it's published at 11 o'clock. It's taken far too long. I was chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee when we actually debated, we had a meeting with John Chilcot in 2009, and at that time we were told it was going to take about a year or maybe 2 years to produce. So this has dragged on too long. I think it's important that we look at it in the whole when it's published and don't jump to conclusions about what's in it.
What do you say to those, and there are many, who describe Tony Blair as a war criminal?
I think they need to wait and see what Chilcot says. There are obviously very strong emotions. There are some people who've already made their mind up. And regardless, if Chilcot comes out and says things which are not as critical as they want of Tony Blair, they will say it's a whitewash. And that, unfortunately, is inevitable. But I'm sure a lot of people genuinely will look at this and say this is a complex issue and there are arguments on both sides. And frankly, it's going to tell us a lot more about the way the processes of government and the interaction between intelligence and politics and different lobbying and positions within different countries than it would have done before. I think it will provide a lot of work for historians. Yes.
And do you believe, and this is a debate that will go on, as you say, and this is a question that has been addressed thus far. So I think it's one that you can address prior to this report being released. Do you believe or not that Tony Blair had made a firm promise to George Bush that this war would happen and he would stand shoulder to shoulder with the American president and the American armed forces before the vote of Parliament? Was it a fait accompli?
I think it was public knowledge that the UK and US policy on Iraq had been set out in many public statements that the intention was to get Saddam to comply with the 18 UN resolutions. And the Clinton regime, not just Bush, had actually adopted a policy of regime change in Iraq in 1998. So that was the American position. The question was whether we were going to try and get the UN route to put more pressure on Saddam, or whether the Americans would go unilaterally. And Blair succeeded in getting the Americans to go, Bush, even though he was reluctant, to go to the UN in 2002. And then again in 2003, there was another attempt. I think the issue here is not about what happened or what didn't happen at Crawford. I think it's more about the relationship between different branches of our government and also the American system.
Mike Gapes, thank you very much indeed.